Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about uncertainty. Okay, we've been talking about motifs and how we discover motifs, and we ended the last little lecture session on with the discussion of the importance of particular positions in a multiple sequence alignment, and we kind of intuited our way through this idea that importance is related to information, is related to conservation. So today we're going to talk a little bit about a concept called uncertainty. Just as a quick recap, here's our importance, here's our hexapeptide motif we've been using as an example. Here it is represented in a web logo or sequence logo. We're just looking at the frequency matrix here in graphic form. And we talked a little bit about how these sites in blue, these positions in blue, are intuitively more important in describing this motif because they do not change, whereas this position 3 possibly has lower importance in defining the motif because more change is allowed at that position. We left with the question, how do we calculate this importance when we think about computing on this value? So there are two points to consider here. First, the first point is more important is another way of saying less uncertain, right? So these positions here, if someone were to ask you what residue you expect to find there, you would have pretty good certainty at saying a leucine. Not 100%, but certainly very high certainty. Whereas at position 3, you would be less certain about what to say if someone asked you that question. And then another point to consider we'll come back to at the end of this lecture series is that all states are not equally likely. We'll explain that in a little more. So what I'd like to pivot to here is talking less about importance and more about uncertainty, because we can relate the uncertaintiness, the amount of uncertainty, to how important it is. They are inversely related. So let's talk about uncertainty and whether we can calculate this. We can calculate it as something a computer can work on, then we can apply bioinformatics to it. So, of course, since I asked the question, the answer is yes, we can calculate uncertainty. Let's go through it in an intuitive approach first before we apply mathematics to it. So in this slide, I have summarized a somewhat human-centered approach to thinking about uncertainty. Let's start with our simple system of 4 possible states. You can think of it as the 4 bases in a DNA strand, or if you're a D&D aficionado, as a 4-sided die roll. So we have 4 possible states is assumption number 1. And assumption number 2 is that all states are equally likely to occur. Okay, based on these assumptions, we can make several observations. First, we can observe that the chances of any number coming up on our die is always 1 out of 4. Hidden in this assumption 2 is that these are independent events. When you roll the die, the roll does not depend on anything that's happened before or anything that happens after it. These are independent random events, these die rolls. So the chance of any number appearing is always 1 out of 4. You have 4 choices. The chance of having one come up is 1, so 1 out of 4. 25%, 0.25, however you like it. Another observation is that any prediction of a choice, I'm trying to predict what number you're going to roll before you roll it, any prediction is purely a guess. There is nothing in this system that allows me to say, one way or the other, this number is more likely to occur than any other number. Okay? So we can conclude from this simple system that it is as unpredictable as possible. Given any system with 4 choices, with 4 states, exactly 4 states, there is no way to make this system more uncertain. Okay, these 2 conclusions are essentially saying the same thing. There's no way to make it more unpredictable. Another way of saying this is it is at maximum uncertainty. Okay, let's convert that into mathematics before we move forward. We often call uncertainty entropy, or H, and so I'll be referring to it as H in these equations. Let's formalize our assumptions. We have a random variable called X. That variable has I possible outcomes. You can think of this random variable X as the roll of a die. And the I possible outcomes are the number of sides on that die. So in order to calculate the uncertainty, we use the probability of a roll occurring, the probability of an outcome occurring. Here we denote that as P of X sub I. It's the probability of some outcome times the log base 2 of that probability. Now, why do we use a log base 2 here? We use a log base 2 primarily because we're considering this, if you go back to our important slide deck, we're considering this as a yes-no question series. 2 states, is it a 1 or a 2? If yes, is it 1? Right, so there are 2 states at every choice, yes or no, and so we use log base 2. That really just determines what units we use to describe entropy. If we wanted to use a log base 10, we certainly could, as long as we were consistent, and it would just determine different units at the end. So don't get too caught up in why we're using log base 2 here. Okay, so let's say we have random variable X, and it has 4 independent randomly distributed states T. This is equivalent to a 4-sided die. Those randomly distributed states are the rolls of the dice. They are independent. One roll does not depend on what the previous roll did or what future rolls will do. And they are randomly distributed. The dice aren't weighted. There's no prevalence of one number over another. Okay, we call those states capital T. And then we simply solve this equation for H. So H, as I goes from 1 to 4, those are our randomly distributed states. We take the probability of each times the log base 2 of the probability. Well, we already showed on the previous slides that the probability of that occurring is 0.25, or 1 out of 4. And so this is just a 1 out of 4. This would be state 1. This would be state 2, state 3, state 4. So this would be rolling a 1, rolling a 2, rolling a 3, rolling a 4. You add all of those up, and it comes out to 2. Now we refer to these as bits, and that goes back to the log base 2 assumption. If we used log base 10, we would call them nats. They would be different numbers, but the concept would be the same. We're going to stick with bits here. What is this number 2? This number 2 bits is what we refer to as the maximum uncertainty. If we assume, again, that all states in our system are equally likely to occur, in other words, our system is at maximum uncertainty, then the entropy of that system, we say, is 2 bits. Conveniently enough, this calculation here, this equation here, reduces to this very simple equation. You simply take the log base 2 of the number of states, and you get 2 bits if the states are 4. Okay, this number in the yellow box is just a reduction of this big summation equation. They are exactly the same. That allows us to easily calculate the maximum certainty in any system. Now, the systems will differ. One major way they differ is how many states are possible. In a biological context, you can think of it as 4 states if you're talking about DNA, 20 states if you're talking about amino acids. The number of states will determine the maximum uncertainty possible. So in a 4-state system, you can't have any more entropy than 2 bits. That's the maximum entropy, maximum uncertainty. But if you increase the number of states possible, let's say you go up to 8 or 12 states or 20 states, then the maximum uncertainty increases. There are more possible choices, there's more uncertainty in there. Intuitively, this makes sense if you think about it from the die roll perspective. If you roll a 4-sided die, you have 4 choices to make. If you roll a 12-sided die, all of a sudden you have 12 choices to make. Mathematically, we can see this happen when we calculate H for each of these systems. Again, each of these systems, we're assuming every possibility is equally likely. Every outcome is equally probable. So a log base 2 of 4 is 2 bits. If you roll an 8-sided die, the maximum uncertainty is always 3 bits. A 12-sided die, it's 3.585 bits, et cetera, et cetera. This is uncertainty. This is entropy, and we're going to use this concept to discuss multiple sequence alignments and motif discovery in the next set of slides. Before we go there is an Excel spreadsheet where I've done a simple calculation that might be useful for you. So I'm going to try to share that with you now. This is up on Google Drive as well. So if you can see this here, I've created an Excel workbook. I've entered number of states, and I've just gone from 1 all the way down to 100. I've done 100 different states. And then I've calculated the maximum uncertainty, assuming all states are equally probable. These are in bits, and you can see this is simply the log. Here's the formula up here in the formula bar. This is the log of the number of states using a base 2. Okay, remember in Excel, if you're not quite sure what this function means, you can always click this FX button next to the bar, and it will open up the formula builder on the right side, and you can look and see the synopsis of each function. So this log function will return the logarithm of a number to the base you specify. Here again, we'll close that. I am using a cell reference instead of an actual number here. That's why this is blue in my incarnation of Excel. It also highlights the cell here. So I'm telling Excel, calculate the log base 2 of the number of states, where the number of states is encoded in these cells here. And then I've simply graphed it as a dot plot here. And as you can see, our number of states increases from 0 to 120 along the vertical axis or along the horizontal axis. The maximum uncertainty in each of these systems in bits is along the horizontal or the vertical axis. Excuse me, my dimensions are mixed up today. And you can see that it increases logarithmically, of course, because this is a logarithmic calculation. Okay, I'll close on one important thing to keep in mind. This system, or this calculation of maximum uncertainty, will be the same for every system with a certain number of states. So any 4-state system will have the same maximum uncertainty, 2 bits. That does not change as long as the system has 4 states. In the next slide deck, we'll talk about actual uncertainty compared to maximum uncertainty. The maximum uncertainty is linked to the number of states in a system. It's not linked to anything else about that system. Number of times you roll the dice doesn't matter as long as you have 4 states. This is the maximum. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next set.